Welcome to our backyard. This is the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We are two friends having a discussion after everyone else has passed out or gone to bed. Grab a drink and listen as we discuss everything from automation, space exploration, and why the meaning of life is 42.
UBI. No, it's not an SCD, although it does sound like one. Universal Basic Income. Is it the future of welfare or the downfall of society? But before we get into UBIs, Nick, how are you and what are you drinking?
I am doing great. I am drinking the random assortment of beers left over after someone visits. I'm currently drinking a Pelican Brewing Bad Santa beer. What about you?
That sounds extremely odd, but I'm drinking a Stillhouse bourbon, which is pretty good. It's keeping me warm at night. And I think we might have bit off more than we could chew like we normally do, Nick.
There's a lot that goes into everyone universally getting a bunch of money, but apparently it's super simple, but very complex at the same time.
I feel like I have a joke there, but I'm just going to end up cutting it out, so I'm just going to leave that open-ended.
Okay, so just when listening to people explain it, they always start with, it's a very simple concept and process. And then when someone challenges it, I feel like they're like, well, it's actually more complicated than that.
Yes, but no.
Exactly.
This conversation of universal basic income is in fact an old one, going back to conversations in ancient Greece. Ancient Athens, to be specific, in 483 BC, when Athens found a new silver mine. A debate arose. Aristodes wanted to give the money to Athenian citizens. A different man, Thermocrates, which you might be familiar with, I probably butchered all those names, but he wanted to build warships for Athens. Those warships would be used to defeat the Persians who invaded. We all know how that one turned out. Fast forward to 1551, when Thomas More's book Utopia would be released, which had a form of UBI in it. Then in 1790s, a founding father of America, Thomas Paine, wanted a citizen's dividend. A dividend for every citizen getting paid based on the resources profit of the GDP that the United States produced. Then we move forward to the 20th century, the 1980s. A Milton Friedman. He would have a form of universal basic income called negative income tax. He wanted this to replace welfare. And something I found also interesting, both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Richard Nixon wanted some form of universal basic income. And I'll be honest with you, I figured those two figures would be on opposite sides on everything.
That's a pretty safe bet.
But I think a good place to start is the negative income tax, because that would lead into what everyone thinks in the 21st century with politicians like Andrew Yang and philosophers talking about with the universal income. And how the negative income tax would be and work was a set figure would be defined, and if you made less than that figure, rather than paying taxes, you got paid by the government. An example. Say we set an income of $40,000 a year. If you made under that, for example, $20,000, the government would pay you the difference, divide that by 2, and give you that. So if you made $20,000, the government would pay you $10,000, because the difference between $40,000 and $20,000 is $20,000. $20,000 divided by 2 is $10,000. So if you made $35,000, they would give you $2,500. So the difference between $40,000 and $35,000 is $5,000, so $5,000 divided by 2. And that was supposed to be, or hopefully supposed to be, a way to replace the welfare system. Did not go. Was just much like universal basic income today, a lot of talk.
Yeah, and universal basic income has been tried in small scales at a few other places. I don't know if you were going to get into that.
Eventually. Okay. I do want to say, the welfare system is trying to do good, but a lot of fail falls. Bureaucracy, glass ceilings, and tons of strings for welfare. There's actually a limit how much you can make before they take it away. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But the thing that kind of made me more interested in universal basic income is it might reduce bureaucracy. And Nick, you know how much I love bureaucracy.
Yeah, I thought this was the biggest pro in the universal basic income side, because it is universal.
It's also less government.
It's not, you know, a bureaucrat looking at a bunch of paperwork deciding if you are eligible for welfare or eligible for this program or that program. It's just everyone gets it. It can be automated. There's way less people. And I do like that part of it.
Well, just to give an idea of how much is spent on welfare, I've seen people try to explain welfare being as much as high as $9.35 trillion in the United States, which, based on my research, is completely kind of horseshit. But it is high. It's somewhere between 432 billion to 1.6 trillion. It all depends who you're asking and how they define it. A number majority agree with, which I didn't dive into of how they defined it, was in 2019 the US spent 744 billion, so I assume that number has only increased. And with things of more people going on unemployment and needing welfare, I mean, as November 2022, there is an estimated 6.01 million unemployed people.
Yeah, and to just, while we're throwing numbers out, similar to Mike's search for a how much do we spend on welfare number, the search for how much will we spend on universal basic income number is
imagination.
Yes. So this should be of shock to absolutely no one. The people who want universal basic income have small numbers, and the people who don't want universal basic income have big numbers. But I will say, even the small numbers are big, like $2 trillion big. And the big numbers are $4 or more trillion dollars. And so I think a good middle ground is 3 trillion, $2.5 to $3 trillion. And I don't know how to explain how much money that is.
It's definitely no $1 billion.
It is so much less than $1 billion.
Just an idea for people, because this would probably be the most people beneficial for the UBI, would be people below the poverty line and the middle class. The poverty line varies in the United States depending on where you are by a few thousand, but usually it's around $12,800 for a single individual and $17,000 for two people. And much like with welfare numbers, the middle class, it also depends on who you ask. The U.S. government defines the middle class as a single adult who makes between $30,000 and $90,000, two adults making between $42,000 and $127,000. The average American says the middle class is between $50,000 and $100,000, and economics pretty much have the center of the middle class being at the $90,000 mark. Location also having a huge part about it.
Yeah, I feel like you got to get above 50 to be out of the middle class. That seems reasonable.
Oh, yeah. I think, like, for me, middle mark is like 75, 80 is probably middle.
And I don't
class.
want to accuse the government of trying to throw out fraudulent statistics by setting a not good benchmark, but it seems like that's what they're doing.
False data. Nick, did you read the same studies I kept coming across?
I mean, I don't have to read any studies to figure out the government's going to lie to me. So, yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting because there is a very age differential between who wants UBI and who doesn't. The older people are, the less they want universal basic income. The younger the people are, the more they want universal basic income. Just numbers to keep in mind. Gen X, on average, has an income after taxes of $88,000. Millennials have an income around $58,000 after taxes.
Is X older or younger than millennials?
X is older. X is our parents.
So Z is the one below millennials.
Yeah, Z is like the 1997 and above.
Okay. Those assholes.
Yes. And sticking on with that real quick, a poll was done by Data for Progress to see if people actually support universal basic income in 2021, and found that 55% of the population supports it. A big caveat, and this is why I say some studies were bullshit, they only surveyed 1,137 people. Seems a bit low when you're talking about an entire country.
Yeah, and My favorite was watching YouTube videos of people going up on the street and asking people if they would support universal basic income. Much lower population, but I do feel like more representative of America. And what overwhelmingly turned out is pretty much any young kid supports universal basic income, but their support wanes if they have to pay a higher tax rate for it.
Yeah. A different group, which I have a little bit more respect for, is a Pew Research Group. They did their own study in 2020 with a much better sample size of 11,000 people, quite literally 10 times the amount of people. They found 78% Republicans opposed universal basic income of $1,000, 66% of Democrats in favor of it. Adults under 30 were at a 2-to-1 odds in favor of universal basic income. Adults over 65 were nearly 3/4 opposed. Something also I thought was it's kind of obvious when you think about it, but it's still interesting to see it on paper. In that same study, they also looked at the ethnicity for who was in favor and against universal basic income. 73% of Black Americans were in favor. 63% of Latin Americans were in favor. 35% of white people were in favor.
Asians?
I don't remember, but it was less than... It had to be less than white because the number didn't stick out. I think that was the order of high to low. So if I remember correctly, then Asians would have been less.
I mean, I completely believe that. I was just curious.
Sorry, I actually didn't write that one down. My fault.
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised that they're below 33%. So anyway, moving on.
Well, I know we've talked about it in different episodes, but I want to touch about AI, even if it's just some point, because that's a huge driving point when I saw and listening to conversations about universal basic income, was the threat of job displacement, which is a real threat. It's okay. Well, the world is shifting. We are seeing another revolution, an AI technology revolution, much like when the Industrial Revolution happened. Jobs went extinct, new ones formed. The question, though, that everyone's wondering, because is AI going to make that much of a difference where the jobs are not going to pop up new and just get rid of the old ones? Time will tell. But if we're going to look at history, that's probably not true.
Something that I thought was really telling, it was a really interesting quote. It was a debate between two people about UBI, and one of the guys, they were talking about automation, and his argument was, imagine telling one of the founding fathers that, in 150 years or whatever the time frame is, only 1% of Americans will work in agriculture.
Oh, they would think you're insane. They think you're a witch.
Yeah, exactly. You're a witch. She's lighter than a duck. She's a witch. So, I don't know. Can you imagine going back in time and telling someone only 1%, less than, I can't remember if it's 1 or around, above or below, but 1% of the U.S. population works in agriculture compared to a time when
everyone,
90% of the U.S. population worked in agriculture?
Yeah, technology moves fast and the world's ever changing. Just an idea, the World Economic Forum estimates that AI will cause 85 million jobs to be displaced, but create 97 million jobs, all by 2025. And much like the middle class and how much is spent on welfare, it's all kind of made up numbers. I'm sorry, this is just hilarious to me. So, Forbes estimates that the U.S. could lose 73 million jobs by 2030 to AI, and that China could lose 236 million jobs by 2030. Oxford completely just disagrees with them, saying that U.S. may lose 1.5 million jobs and China 12.5 million jobs. And then the PwC says AI will be worth probably 15.7 trillion by 2030, a 26% increase in global GDP. So it all seems like AI is actually going to bring more jobs rather than take away jobs. The question is, will people be able to adapt? And Nick, you'll like this. We talk about economics a lot, like the people who make the economic guesses, and boy, are they so wrong so often. So I decided to look up how often they are right, Nick. And Nick, you want to take a guess on how many times those economics were correct about guessing a recession?
Do the Cubs win the World Series more?
Ooh, it's
Tied?
it's how long did it take the Cubs to win a World Series?
About once every 100 years.
Oh, so it's actually pretty close. Turns out in the last 150 recessions, they were only right twice.
Well, the Cubs only won the World Series twice, so
The economists are right 1 out of 75 times, and
but there's probably been economists longer than there's been
the Cubs. Oh yeah,
Chicago Cubs.
Oh, yeah.
So probably the Cubs are winning.
yeah. That's a weird sentence.
They're losing
But they're
at the game of life, but they're better than economists.
I decided to guess. I like gambling. Gambling is interesting to me for mathematics, even though I've never been inside of a casino. Do you know what the odds are at a roulette table for guessing the correct number?
The right number? I don't know. It's like 1 in 60 something.
1 out of 37. It's almost double the chances of the economics being wrong than you placing a number on a roulette table. Well, the reason why I bring this all up is we don't know the future. We know AI will replace jobs. And the best example I looked towards was the Industrial Revolution. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Industrial Revolution, I'm not explaining to it. Learn your history. But it was a period. It was slow. It evolved. It took about 100 years, all in all, to fully transform. I assume the technology revolution in the 21st century will be faster, which will cause a higher job loss initially. I feel like that's very fair to say. And for those saying years ago, I'm not sure if it's still popular, just learn how to code, I disagree with. And I think that's where UBI fits in more. Of maybe UBI be used as a transitional period as we get more and more jobs switching, like as we're almost in a changing phase.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I start to get lost on UBI, because we're trying to predict the future. Yes, it does look like a lot of jobs will transition to automation, but it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily know if that means everyone's, like, people are going to suddenly become unemployable overnight.
No, I think it's most likely going to be a period, but I think the period's going to be exacerbated because of how connected everyone is and how much technology we have. So, like I said, the Industrial Revolution, it took, I think, like 60 years for Germany, those industrial fucks, to adapt to the Industrial Revolution.
But man, once they got there.
Yeah, maybe we should have stopped them before they got there. But yeah, it's it took a while for things to change technology-wise. It was less communication, less easy to transport. I think all those factors would make people losing jobs much faster. Like, I would say look at cell phones. Like, just look at the 21st century of, like, what has changed. Do CDs even get manufactured anymore?
I don't think anyone's asked that question in, like, 5 years at least.
Yeah, and that's 5 years.
People are just collecting the unused writable CDs that are in people's desks, putting new albums on it. That's my guess.
Well, I figured everyone just converts to aux cord or Bluetooth. Like, that was probably a huge industry. And that's just adapt or die. But the question is, can companies adapt fast enough, and can people adapt enough? Like, a biggest one being transportation. It's used a lot in universal basic income talks. Is we're going to have self-driving cars sooner rather than later. And a lot of people's jobs in the entire world is transportation. Driving Ubers, taxis, semi-trucks, all those transportation vehicles. All those jobs in the foreseeable future will eventually be replaced by automation. And that's where just learn to code, I disagree with. I don't suspect a 50-year-old man to have his entire career disappear overnight and him just be like, oh, I'll just pick up code. It doesn't seem right.
Yeah, well, I don't think that, I don't know, I don't think that that's the solution either. I just feel like there's be better used to help finding other jobs that are applicable, but it's not automated yet. Like a lot of what I deal with is going to be late to automation in the forest industry because automation technology, all technology goes to agriculture first, and then if there's a fit, it'll make its way to forestry. But because the ground is so difficult and changing, and drones and stuff like that tend to have a harder time machines working in a forest environment. And we're short on labor. But I feel like there's, I mean, second, how many coders do we need? Like, that's what I don't get. Like, they're like, oh, all these truck drivers, their jobs can be automated, learn to code. It's like, I don't know how many coders we need, but it can't be that many, right? But I don't know anything about computers.
I don't know. I assume that was just a derogatory kind of thing to say, like, it's just another way to say adapt or die. I don't know.
Right.
I don't really have social media. That's soon to be my department.
Well, so the fun part of, the little bit backstory I know is that some journalists said that to, blue collar people who are going to lose their jobs, but then whatever CNN or I think a CNN anchor said it, but then CNN like fired all their people, and they were trying to make people feel bad, and everyone was just like, "Learn to code, fucker." It was pretty funny.
Hey, CNN actually doing something good.
Well, they were out of money, so they couldn't pay their people. So, I mean, I don't know how good that is.
All right. But let's get it back a little bit back on track. Nick, you do know in America, we already have some form of universal basic income, depending on what state you're in, right?
Are you talking about the 49th state?
I am talking about good old Alaska.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Alaska.
Now, you've actually been to Alaska, which I'm jealous about. And, man, if Alaska wasn't so cold, it seemed like a great place to be.
See, the great thing about Alaska is the lack of people, and cold allows that.
Fair enough.
But it's got coastal towns that aren't as cold. They're not warm. So I don't know if that really cancels out. The Alaska Permanent Fund is what you're referring to.
Yes.
So the different companies in Alaska, mostly mostly oil companies, pay into a program that dispenses almost like a profit sharing to the citizens of Alaska. It's not much. It's usually like $1,000 to $3,000 a year, depending on how well these companies do. I believe the average is $1,600 a year for the last like 10 years or so.
Yeah, I saw something similar than that. It was after the 2008 crash. It was pretty consistent at that number.
So, from what I read, so I want to get a preface of when we talk about universal basic income, we're not referring to any specific plan unless we
name that specific plan.
Say so. Yeah, unless we name the specific plan. There's all sorts of plans with different numbers and whatever. So, most of them tend to be more than the $1,000 a year. But I thought it was an interesting study of the Alaska Permanent Fund because it is applicable. It's just a little bit lower number than
smaller scale.
In scale, it's probably the biggest scale UBI that's been tried. No?
We'll get to it, but I want to stick with Alaska for a minute.
Okay.
So, yeah, Nick, that's pretty much it. Ever since it was like 1980s or something when it was first implemented, and much like every UBI, there are rules. You can't be absent from Alaska for like 150 days. No felonies that year. You have to be in a full year. So if you move to Alaska January 2nd, you won't get a money from the Alaska Permit Fund until the after the year because you missed a day of that year. Like there are rules to the UBI. And something that I thought was interesting. There's a study from the University of Alaska in 2016. Might be some bias there, just saying. University of Alaska on a survey about giving Alaskans money. They found that the Alaska Permit Fund reduced poverty by 20% in Alaska.
Seems like a big number.
Yeah, it does, but I should have looked this up, but I don't know what the cost of living is in Alaska.
It's simultaneously cheap and expensive. It depends where you live.
What do you want? Do you want common goods or do you want cheap goods?
I mean, it's more expensive. The housing and stuff is cheaper, but the cost of everything is crazy expensive, especially if you live further out. Like people are paying like $50 for a can of beans in some places. So depends how you're living, I guess.
Location. But I imagine, I'll be honest, when I think of Alaska, I don't really think of lots of multimillionaires. I think more blue collar hunter people. So I imagine for those people, $1,000 makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where I'll disagree with this study, not on any numbers, and I'm no Alaskan expert, but I live in Oregon, which is a coastal state.
Pretty close to Alaska.
Pretty similar climate to Alaska. And for my honeymoon, me and my wife went all over Alaska, and it didn't seem like there was any less poverty in Alaska than there was in Oregon. And maybe it's just homeless populations were similar, but it seemed like there's the same amount of, blue tarp houses and, shitty cars in the middle of nowhere, broke down boats.
That might just be any state near the Pacific Ocean. That might just be a Pacific Ocean problem.
When I picture someone having a 20% reduction, either that means their problem was really big to start with, or it should be noticeably better.
Touche. I don't know. Maybe that has to do with more off the beaten path for those people. Not quite sure.
But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I don't know. I know Anchorage has just as big a homeless problem as Portland does, but also realistically, what's an extra $1,000 a year supposed to solve that? I guess it's like, I feel like the number's a little inflated, but I don't think the purpose of the fund is to raise everyone out of poverty. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. Like I said, this is from a study from the University of Alaska. So they could have been on the up and up, but it's...
And again, I can't stress this enough. If you have a homeless population similar to Portland, that is in no way a good thing.
Yeah. But America isn't the only one considering UBIs. Right now, an experiment is happening in Africa, specifically Kenya. The company or charity, I'm not quite sure which they are, Give Directly, that's the name of the company, in 2018 started a UBI experiment, giving 21,000 adults in a specific region in Kenya cell phones and money. They give this money in multiple ways. Three ways, to be specific. Long term, which is 75 cents a day for 12 years. Short term, 75 cents a day for 2 years. And a lump sum at one time of $500 stimulus check. The 75 cents comes from the price of the region. It is directly about 2,250 Kenyan shillings a year, which is about 25% of the average household earnings. So they're trying to get about 25% of the region's earnings, and this region tends to be a little bit more on the poorer side. As for the results, so far, it's not been the full 12 years. It's overall pretty good. Life has improved for their participants. More people are going to school, a lot healthier, less people dying at a young age. It seems to be beneficial for them.
So I saw a similar experiment in Namibia, and I'd say almost just from, and maybe this speaks to the Alaska plan as well, is that it does really provide relief for people in extreme poverty and a few other groups. I don't know if you came across this, Mike, but what I saw mostly is that women were the group most positively affected.
For me, I saw for every universal basic income, it was children. Children were the most benefited by it.
I did see that as well.
I don't know about your specific study, but just for all the ones I'm personally gonna talk about, it was the children benefited the most.
And is that because the children could attend school instead of having to worry about funds? Is that what you saw?
That also nutrition was a huge part. The quality of food increased in multiple UBI experiments. Stress relief was a big one. Like, I don't know if you've ever been poor. It fucking sucks. And trauma is generational. So if like your parents say money doesn't grow on trees, your entire life you'll probably be a little worried about money. But if that's gone a little bit anxiety gone, it's when you have one less bill to pay, it makes your life that much easier. And if your parents are less stressed, you're less stressed. That's what I kind of got from a lot of the universal basic income experiments.
Yeah, I mean that's what I saw too in the Namibian experiment. So it's just a 2-year experiment.
Were they giving money monthly, weekly, yearly? I don't know anything about your experiment.
Monthly. So for 2 years, everyone under the age of 60 got $100, $100 Namibian dollars every month without conditions, and that's the equivalent of about $7 US. And so from the experiment, hunger, the rate of child malnutrition dropped from 42% to 12% in 6 months, and then to 10% after 11 months. And extreme poverty was reduced from 76% to 37%, and unemployment decreased. So the share of the working population increased, which led to an increase in labor, and the number of self-employed people increased. The number of children who regularly attended school doubled to 90%.
Doubled? Holy shit. That's impressive. And Nick, I don't know about you. This might be jumping ahead a little bit too far, but it seems like universal basic income affected different societies in different ways. It's not equal across the board.
By societies, do you mean countries, or societies do you mean parts of the population separately?
Both. I mean classes of people, so like people in below poverty, and also poor / developing countries tend to be more beneficial. And then I saw like first world countries, it wasn't that beneficial.
No, I think universal basic income is 100% a great idea for a developing country. And then I feel like there's a point where it loses effectiveness.
All right. So speaking of effectiveness and points, I want to bring up this. The one I saw a lot argued for UBI was the universal basic income experiment happening in South Korea right now by a governor. The reason why I want to bring it up is the rules that they have. So right now in South Korea, they give a specific money to individuals, but the Koreans receiving the money must only spend it in their local community and may not spend on chains. So no chain restaurants, no chain businesses. The amount the participants receive is $220, and they don't receive it monthly. They receive it quarterly. And the reason why they're doing this, I didn't realize South Korea had 27% of their 15 to 29-year-olds either unemployed or employed. Some caveats, though.
Fuck, for all that time in school, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'll be honest. In my mind, as a dumb Western American, South Korea to me is like a super city. I imagined they would be very low unemployment. But another note, because we've mentioned it slightly, is the government in this experiment have access to what you're spending that money on. And I saw from both for my Kenya research that I saw, Alaska research, and the net negative income, they were all just like, give the money and we don't keep track of how you spend it. I'm also a big fan of you're forced to spend it on your local community and not chains. I also thought that was pretty cool.
I do like that. I feel like that seems like something like South Korea, like for a developed nation, that seems better. but generally those stores are going to be more expensive. So if you're trying to bring someone out of poverty, forcing them to shop at maybe something more expensive store isn't the ideal scenario. But I definitely think for a developed nation, that's I hadn't run into that, so I really do like that idea.
They actually are planning on upscaling it to more people, and how they want to do it is by taxing robots. So having a robot tax to pay for it all.
I have heard about the robot tax. Was that their idea first?
I have no idea. I'll be honest, Nick. There are so many different universal basic income experiments happening and so many different points. It's the order of operations. I have no idea.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
But it is very interesting sticking on with first world versus third world country. There was a UBI conducted in Finland, and what they found, though it increased people's happiness, it did not increase jobs. But for the developing countries and third world countries, it seems like it also increased jobs. It seems like for first world countries, it simply made people less anxious and more happy, which is kind of universal across the thing. But it didn't make more jobs. It didn't allow people to. Because I don't know, when I think universal basic income, I think of the argument of allow people to get themselves more educated, allow people to start their own businesses, allow people to do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't seem to be the case for first world countries, though.
No, I think the problem is just the amount of money that is required to do these things. And this is my problem with UBI. I guess, okay, so this, I don't want to get into that right now, but $100 Namibian, you can go, it's $4 to go to the doctor. So it's a huge increase, right? $1,000 in the United States will not pay for your doctor's visit if you don't have insurance, right? So it's not.
Yeah, what the average ambulance ride is $11,000.
Yeah, so it's not the lifesaver that it is in other places, right? I mean, $1,000, that's like a month's rent, depending where you live. Maybe less, maybe more. I think that's the problem, that the amount of money to, set someone up in the US to where they could pay for, medical visits for not just them, but for their family, and have someone stop working so they can attend school. That number's not $1,000. That's just my.
Well, I don't think the universal basic income is to stop you from working. I think it's supposed to be like a relief fund. And I have another example that's happening.
My point was not to stop the breadwinners from working, but a lot in the more developing nations, universal basic income led to the kids not having to go to work, then able to attend school so that they could then have, a better life following. But when everyone has to work, and the kids, once they get old enough to work, stop attending school, you lose all that education years you would be getting educated.
Yeah, but I look at that study you said, and doubling the attendance at school, if that goes on for a generation, that's another generation people that much smarter, which is huge.
Right, but I don't really know if I see that happening in a developed country.
Oh, no. I agree with you. It will not affect majority. I think it would only affect people below the poverty line. Like that extra 1,000, maybe instead of working a full-time job and a part-time job, maybe you're just working a full-time job. And that way you get to spend more time with your kid or something like that. But there is another study going on in America, which I think is prevalent because it's a first world and also a poor community in a first world. Well, not poor. It's a community that's had struggles in the past, mainly due to, the American government. A nation within a nation, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I don't know if you came across this group, Nick.
I did not.
So they own casinos, and they give part of the profits to their tribe members, even children who aren't an adult yet. And for the most part, this has significantly helped their tribe members. Parents usually put away their children's money for them for the future or invest it, and it tends to allow the children to pretty much be able to afford college by the time they're 18. As for how much, I'm not quite sure. I've seen everywhere from low as $500 a year to $12,000 a year. But a lot of research has been done on this sort of universal basic income. To me, it reminds me a lot of the Alaska experiment, or I don't even know if you can call it an experiment anymore, just a law. Research has shown that casinos giving money, $4,000 annually, helps the household. It helps parents raise their kids. It also helps children from committing minor crimes. This $4,000 extra a year has helped the poorest children from committing minor crimes by 22%. And a different study from Duke University shows that the UBI reduces the people's likelihood of smoking by 32% and drinking by 18%. But another caveat, because I think this has to play with the first world versus the developing nations, there are side effects from this Cherokee Casino universal basic income. The same study at Duke showed that they saw an increase in obesity by 5% and an increase in diabetes by 13%. So I think this plays into more that the universal basic income helps developing nations or the poorest of the poor. It doesn't really do anything for first world countries.
So it sounds like it almost might be detrimental because you said there increase in diabetes and weight gain.
Yes, but a major decrease in smoking and drinking.
So how are those connected? This seems like a decrease in smoking and drinking would lead to a decrease in weight gain and diabetes.
Well, I imagine those are not separate. I imagine all those like obesity, diabetes, smoking, and drinking is not all correlated to universal basic income. I imagine there's a lot of outside factors that weren't taken into consideration. But it's maybe people were leaning on drinking and smoking as a vice to handle stress, and the extra few $1,000s relieves the stress, so they no longer do so. But now that they relieve stress, they feel like, oh, I got some extra money, I'm going to treat myself to a nice dinner. Oh, I'm going to get dessert, I can afford it. I can see that happening.
Yeah.
And Nick, I want to answer your question since we're talking about governments, and I can't think of a better segue of people getting shafted by the governments than talking about the Native American population. You said that it would cost trillions, which it most likely will. Nick, we've done drinking bill podcasts. We know how much the government spends on things and how many dumb things it spends on. I don't think like 6 trillion means anything to them.
No, it definitely doesn't. And to be so, in all those studies, the reason the number is so low, okay.
Keyword low.
When I say low in a meeting, $2 trillion, it's a relative low. So, in no other context would I use to describe $2 million as
$2 trillion, not million.
$2 trillion.
We're not used to use that number.
I cannot actually comprehend the number 2 trillion. So I'm just going to keep moving on here. Is because it's going to cut every other social program the government has. So no welfare, no food stamps, no work programs. Like, it's universal basic income would be the beginning and the end. That is the only social program the government has.
I mean, since we're not going to see Medicare when we turn 65, I imagine that kind of makes sense to the younger generation. We're paying for something we'll never get to use.
Yeah. Now, and I don't think this is the majority, but I don't know if it's the minority either. There's a group of people who want to implement universal basic income in addition to the welfare programs we have already, which would cost a lot more money, because a lot of the, when I break out the plans for universal basic income, a lot of the savings come from removing the bureaucracy, like Mike mentioned, in the welfare programs. And so if you don't remove those, instead are adding an additional cost to the $975 billion. Is that what
it was around? People have it between 400 billion to 1.6 trillion. It's most likely around 700. billion to 1 trillion.
Okay, so around that, in addition to the cost of UBI, you could be looking at basically another trillion, it sounds like.
$1 billion.
1 trillion. We've reached a point of inflation where they need to make a new Austin Powers movie.
Are they doing that? Isn't that in the works?
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised.
We ran out of stuff. Just repump the same stuff.
No one will notice. So, and this is, I think, a good time to bring up my major concern with universal basic income. I don't understand why, instead of giving everyone an extra $1,000 a month, what if we halved it and we gave people who really needed it $2,000 a month? You know, say below like you said, 50,000. If you make 50,000 above, not household, individually, you get an extra $2,000 a month. I feel like a targeted semi-universal basic income would be so much more effective in a developed country than a universal basic income. And my examples would be, look at all the COVID relief bills, like the PPP loans, the stimulus checks. Me and my wife got stimulus checks, and we both were working more due to COVID than less. We were not without work. So I just felt like a waste, and I feel like that's how I would view UBI. Like, I'd much rather give money to someone who needs money, but if everyone's getting money, I'm definitely gonna have some of that.
I both agree and disagree. I am inherently in favor of having it as a pyramid division for universal basic income. The people who need it more get more, people who need it less get less, people who are well off, they don't need it. I am concerned, though, on the opposite side of it's freedom for all, not freedom for none. So to say that we're all equal kind of means you have to do it for everyone. Though I agree with that, if you're below $50,000, you should get more. If you're middle class, you should get more. If you're upper middle class or above, you should get cut off. The reason why I say I'm cautious of not doing it for everyone is people will game the system. I've personally seen,
I guess, like,
people.
What's the difference between what's going on now and this hypothetical system?
So right now, a huge thing for welfare is, say with your job you're making $9,999, and because you make under $10,000, the government gives you a check. But you still have all these loans, you still have car payments, insurance. But now you get like a different job. Maybe you get promoted from, I don't know, say working the register to being assistant manager. And now instead of making $9,909, you're making $12,000. Well, now you're making over $10,000, so they're going to take away your benefits. It doesn't incentivize you to continue to better yourself, because those benefits were helping keeping you afloat. So you're making, say, $10,000 with the benefits. You get to keep more of that $10,000 to put it towards, better food, better housing, better location, better car payments, stuff like that. But now that you move up to $12,000, just slightly above, you have to spend more of your money, less the government's money, to do that. So in fact, you become poorer by making more money. That's a huge problem that we have during the welfare system.
But temporarily, you're not
No.
capped at $12,000. You can move up from that.
You can move up from any number, but the problem is how to break the cycle. I don't know if you've ever been poor, Nick. Poverty is like a disease. It's very hard to cure yourself from. And it's a lot easier to be lifted out of a well than to climb out of a well.
All right, so hypothetically, let's say $50,000 is the number. If you make above, $50,000, you don't get the hypothetical $2,000 a year or $2,000 a month. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that it's be better to continue to make,
not for universal basic income. I'm talking about current system welfare.
Okay.
For current system welfare, it is better for many individuals to strive to better their situation, because as soon as they reach a certain point, the government will take away any support they give. Now, that support might be the structure, the foundation. That support might... It's a vicious cycle. So say when you're making X, they support you enough with Y. As soon as you make it to A, they take away Y, and then because they take it away, you will fall back to X because now you lose your support. That's a very common thing happen in the welfare system. There are glass ceilings. There are caveats not to increase your situation, which is the welfare system sucks. Just how it is. It needs desperately improvement. But what I was trying to say is I've seen people who own $1 million businesses technically be on food stamps because they don't make any money. Their business makes money. So people will always game the system.
Yeah. Well, that's like in town here. The low income housing is so in demand. It takes it takes a long time to get on to get on the list and whatever. Anyway, by the time you're eligible or like up on the list, basically everyone who lives back there in the low income housing, there's someone guy who owns it's not a brand new Corvette, but it's not an old Corvette. It's at least post 2007. And then there's Escalades and a whole bunch of nice, and it's not just one apartment. It's just a bunch of nice cars. Yeah, people are going to game the system.
Correct.
But I don't know I don't think welfare or universal basic income is going to cure dishonesty. I think there's going to be gaming of the system in both programs.
No, I agree with you, but I think it might be mitigated more with universal basic income. Because
that I would agree with.
Humans will always be humans. It's just how it is. If there's an opportunity, we're going to seize it. I just think, because a very common thread I saw with universal income is you just give them the money and they're on their own. How they spend it is how they spend it. Very few universal basic incomes where they actually keep track of how they spend it. And I think that would be a lot better. Because you can get different APR rates on different stuff depending on what tax bracket you're in, or not tax bracket, what welfare system you're on, stuff like that. It's not great. Like I said, I do agree with you. It should probably be a triangle system where the people at the lowest maybe make more, people at the middle make a little less, people at the top make even less than that. I don't think Now, I've seen people argue it, but to me, universal basic income should not be something you should be able to sustain and live off of. It should alleviate money issues. It should not solve money issues.
Yeah, and that's the great disconnect, right? That's what people say, but then when you ask people what they would do if they had universal basic income, it's like, I'd quit my job and I'd create art and I'd travel.
No,
I don't think you understand the concept.
Well, it is very interesting. Going back to the papers I read about the Cherokees giving from the casino, there was a family, and they would set aside maybe $500 and take the entire family on a vacation to Myrtle Beach. Like they were in South or North Carolina, where they were in that, and it was nice because they couldn't afford to give the family vacation, so they would set aside some money, and they would just take the family on a vacation once a year. That seems like more what the universal basic income should be. Be like, oh, well, I'm struggling buying this. I'm struggling with my car payments. Oh, well, I can help pay this off. Oh, this cockroach infested apartment, I can get a little bit better of an apartment and raise my standard of living just slightly. I don't think it should be a universal salary. It should just be, it should be a booster, not a cure-all.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And again, I think it should be, like you mentioned, I think the welfare provides incentives to not work, like you said, to game the system. And I think the UBI provides a little bit more incentive to work, because it's, like you said, it doesn't mean you can stop working. I don't know of anyone who can survive on $1,000 a month in most places in the United States.
Unless you have
And
like
there's
10,000 roommates.
yeah, and this is the place, and this is what I think UBI is. This is the one I like that it's not right. Like no one's watching what you're spending it on. So, whenever you say $1,000 a month, people who live in New York City who are below the poverty line say, "Well, that doesn't really help me." With $1,000 a month, if you can get out of New York City,
Oh, you can buy a
you,
bus ticket. Maybe
you
not a
can
train
use
ticket.
that to move.
Maybe not a train ticket, how much trains cost,
So,
but definitely a bus ticket.
A lot of people will debate that, saying how much it costs to hire movers. If you have enough stuff that you need movers to move it, like you just, I don't know what to tell you, dude. I don't have enough stuff to need movers to move it. So
I can actually tell you this. When I moved cross country and I had to rent a U-Haul, everything I owned from one part of the country to literally the other side of the country, it cost me $1,100 to move everything I had. And that's including a tow hitch to attach my car.
So and that's where a lot of people who say they want more money in UBI say, well, I live in New York, $1,000 doesn't do anything for me. It's like, cool. Well, that money is to get you the fuck out of there, because no, $1,000 won't help you in New York, and it's not going to. Like, I don't know, what you want us to do besides move out of New York City. But with UBI, as opposed to normal welfare, you can use that money to move. And then people, not saying people are all going to suddenly leave New York City, but I'm just saying that's an option now. Like a lot of people say they can't afford to move somewhere cheaper. Like that's now an option, and I think that's good because there's a lot of places where you can live on $1,000.
Well, that's very important because essentially, since after the 2008 recession, I don't remember the figure, but less people are willing to relocate for jobs. That number has significantly decreased, and maybe UBIs will boost it.
Yeah, I hope so because that's as someone who does hiring, people are very particular with where they want to live. It's hard to get people to move. And
you know what's funny, Nick?
What's that?
You said in the beginning, imagine talking to our forefathers that less than 1% of the population would be farmers. Try explaining to anyone's great grandfather that they don't want to move for a better opportunity and job.
No, Mike, try explaining to someone's forefather that they don't want to move across town for a better opportunity.
It's a
bitch, I crossed the country in a wagon.
Dude, I'm just picturing like Industrial Revolution where there were like 12-year-olds losing arms, just like trying to just like change cotton now. They're like, wait, you're complaining about what? It really puts things in perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is something I want to talk about of how we're gonna pay for it in America specifically. I saw taxation universally across the board. I sort of think it might work, but I don't think it's how they work. They want it to work. I don't think they should do taxes on citizens, but on businesses. I think they need to much like the welfare, kind of mess around with the taxation on billion-dollar companies. For example, Americans, the citizens, paid tax ranges from 10% to 37%. The average in 2021 for a single worker was 28.4% taxes. For large companies, well, Amazon federally income tax in 2021 was 6.1%. Exxon was 2.8%. Dow, AT&T, and Charter Communication were basically tax exempt for that year.
Well, to be fair, they could have taken losses.
They did not
have to pay taxes.
They didn't. I specifically.
I know that's how a lot of big companies, when they lose money,
they get out of it. Yeah,
to pay taxes for that.
No. I thought the exact same thing. I can tell you, Dow, AT&T did not. I don't know about Charter. Now, I'm not hating the player. I'm hating the game. I'll be honest. If I had $1 billion industry like they did, I'd probably do the exact same thing. But maybe Amazon should be paying a little bit more than 6.1% taxes, or the American people should not be paying on average of 28.4% taxes. And I feel like that could possibly cover the cost for universal basic income.
So, well, I don't think there's a way to do it without taxing citizens. So what's the revenue of Amazon?
Oh God, I don't know. But hang on. When you say not tax citizens, would you also consider taxing citizens on a optional commodity that they want to buy? Would that be
like an excise tax?
Like Colorado's weed tax?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you count?
That's pretty much what I'm saying.
Would you say that is a citizen's tax or?
I mean, it depends how high it is. Like Canada, their tax on alcohol and tobacco is ungodly.
Well, I do know that in 2021, I don't know why I kept finding research for 2021, but luckily all the years are the same. The Colorado weed tax made $423.5 million. That's
what year is that?
2021.
Okay. What year is it legalized there?
2019, 2018.
I know for Oregon, the amount of money spent on or made on weed has significantly declined since the legalization. So there's kind of a boom, and now there's an oversaturation of the market.
Oh, it's increased for Colorado. It was at like 300 million, and now it's at 42 million.
I think Oregon was first. It increased for a while,
but I also think Colorado's population is increasing. I don't think.
Well, that too. That's a good point. I mean, and this is why I say that. So you talk to fire crews who come from Canada, and this is say like 2017. I haven't talked to Canadians since then. No, this would be 15. A can of chewing tobacco in the United States, say Copenhagen long cut, be like $3.50. In Canada, it'd be almost $30.
I'm sorry, what?
$30 for a can of chew in Canada.
Well, that's stupid.
So they come down here, work fires, and smuggle a bunch back. Allegedly.
Allegedly. The keyword allegedly.
So are we talking like a 5% tax or like 150%? Or let's see, $3. Was that 300% tax? 100% tax.
I'm thinking, this is just me kind of throwing shit at the wall. We kind of follow Alaska a little bit. Instead of having a federal UBI, maybe a state UBI that's federally backed. So the UBI is based on the state's income and jobs and resources. So for Colorado, it might be weed, Alaska, oil. For
Mike, you know where this is going.
No, I don't. I'm very confused. I'm scared.
What is a renewable resource that most states have?
God damn it, trees. God damn it.
Here we are, back at trees. So crazy.
Dude, when I die, please make no tombstone with a tree on it or anything for me. Just let me go.
I'm gonna jackhammer your fucking tombstone and plant a tree on your grave.
Joke's on you. My ashes are going in the Atlantic.
Why would you do that to yourself?
We've had this conversation. The Atlantic is the superior ocean.
Okay, we will have this conversation again, but yeah. You know what? Pollute that ocean. I don't give a shit.
But I think that might be a better way to implement the UBI. But
well, I think that's the way to go. Because okay, so look at Alaska, which comes from oil money, and most federal and state forests have stopped their harvesting of timber, even though it provides ecological benefits. But so you look at a state like Idaho, they have a very low tax rate because they provide all the money for their schools from their state forest land. People don't really care about that anymore. So they still want to try and, stop all the logging that's taking place. If we were able to use this, again, can't stress this enough, renewable natural resource to give that money straight back to people, we could continue to provide money, hopefully, for people and schools if that state had timberland. But a bunch of other Western states that don't have timberland have grazing on state and forest lands. It's not going to be enough to pay for everything, but you're going to have to probably use some mineral rights and stuff like that to help get there. But I do think using what each state has available, maybe it's weed for Colorado, maybe it's timber for Oregon, whatever,
maybe it's lousy
Colorado,
politicians from California.
California has timber. They don't have water.
Well,
I don't
I'm
know.
thinking of more poorer states. What's the poorest state in the United States? Is it Louisiana or Mississippi? Both?
Somewhere there.
I'm trying to think what their taxable commodity would be.
Florida. They just put a tax on
cocaine,
fishing licenses.
Oh, I figure they would have gone with drugs with Florida.
Well, I mean, like those big tourist states, out-of-state fishing licenses get you pretty good, chunk of the way there. It doesn't have to be just one thing, but...
What about hypothetically if we made, say, weed federally legal and is federally taxed, and that was going towards the UBI?
Cool. Sounds good to me.
I'm just trying to figure out how to actually physically pay for the
UBI. It would
UBI.
really depend. I don't know enough about how much money weed would make, right? So say, hypothetically, weed was federally legal and, I don't know, combine a 10% tax on alcohol and weed would be enough to subsidize universal basic income in addition, and along with removing the welfare system to go to just UBI. Cool. Sounds good. 15%? Okay. 20%? Maybe. But when you start getting higher than that, I feel like maybe we need to find an additional source. That's just me personally.
No, I agree with you. It's never good to put all your eggs in one basket.
But and that's the thing. It doesn't have to come from just one source, but it shouldn't come from all of the sources.
Yes, I very much agree with that statement. It should be very defined lines, but you can move within the defined lines.
Yeah. And so I think 4 or 5 sources. So maybe, we put weed, alcohol, gasoline, and then something else,
Lithium.
Lithium, there you go. Let's make those phones more expensive.
Oh, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. What's a cheap commodity that pretty much every state has or every state people use?
Tobacco, I guess we didn't mention.
Yeah, but I feel like tobacco is a little bit more on its way out. I'm thinking a little bit long term.
Now we got to legalize jewels again. We'll be fine.
Oh, yeah, that would probably make a bit more of money. But there is something interesting I want to talk about, because now we're getting a little bit more into the pseudoscience of it all. I tried looking the correlation between poverty and inventors, because a lot of points that people for universal basic income would say is if people were less worried about working all the time, they would be able to create and innovate more. My thought process is if you're poor, you come up with solutions, but on the other flip coin, if you're wealthier, you have the means to create new things. I could not find a study or correlation that points in every direction. The only thing I could find is that in the North, and specifically the Northeast, in the United States, they file for more patents than people in the South. Perhaps it's population density, perhaps it's infrastructure. And for jobs in first world countries, it doesn't seem to create new jobs. It just tends to make people less anxious. It just tends to help third world countries. But again, it does help mental health. So I don't think there's going to be great innovation with universal basic income. Like you said, Nick, with the analogy of, I'd quit full-time to work. I'd quit full-time to paint. That's probably not going to happen. It shouldn't happen based on universal basic income. It doesn't seem that being poor or being rich has anything to do with creation. It's very odd to me. But I want to run something by, because we were talking about how universal basic income should probably be a trickle-up effect, so affect the worst off people most, then middle class, then upper. I want to run this by you. What if we use UBI to pay for stay-at-home parents? So say you are middle class, and you're able in your household to, have one breadwinner and the other one take care of the children. to me, it would kind of make sense to, maybe float $1,000 to that parent staying home just to make sure they're being a good caretaker.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up as well. This is one of the things I talked about earlier. Is that I guess when I meant women benefit from this, I really meant moms benefit from this. The extra money a month allows moms to stay at home with the kids, and the kids benefit because they have a parent home to watch them and teach them and all that stuff. We're in that weird space.
Speaking of strange things, Nick, I'm always confused on how many people for universal basic income just really want to jump up to the $1,000 or $2,000 mark. I personally think, why don't we start at a low value and slowly increase it as need be? Why start off with a middle or high value? Why not test the waters, so to speak?
Yeah, well, what would you start out, hypothetically?
It depends. If we're doing everyone in the United States, no matter of economic standings, probably around $250. If we're doing it middle class and people below the middle class, I would want a formula that could be adjusted over time for inflation. Funny enough, Nick, I actually looked for this formula. No one has yet to develop a formula for this. But I would probably say maybe $500 for middle class and maybe $1,000 for poverty line, and then just see how that goes for a few years and then increase it or decrease it how it is.
Yeah, I never, it seemed that's a good point. For whatever reason, seems like $1,000 was the minimum of the UBI plans.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how everyone came up with that number.
I guess Andrew Yang just said it, and then everyone was like, well, this is it. We can go up from here, boys.
I'm very disappointed there's no formula be like, hey, if the middle class is X and inflation is Y, we make it this. I feel like that should be a very easily formula to derive. But there is none. They just chose a value and just went, okay, yeah, sure. 500 billions to some thing I've never really heard of. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but I guess if you don't give it to everyone, it's just a limited basic income, not a universal basic income.
Well, I think that's why it's an issue. If it's everyone, that's why I think of a triangle. If you're above a certain tax bracket, you get way less, and it just kind of trickles down, which then seems unfair. But it
seems like we're just trying to reinvent welfare differently.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I just want to clarify, I'm for equal opportunity and not equal outcome. And I'm with universal basic income, I get concerned that too many people are trying to go for equal outcome rather than equal opportunity.
Yeah, which is why I like universal basic income as an alternative to the welfare system we have today. Mostly because less bureaucracy. I think it'll end up being the same or cheaper, and you don't have to worry, like, I don't...
No one's keeping track of how you're spending your money.
I don't want to give money to someone on... I hate seeing people on welfare abuse the system. I feel like it's just like, oh, well, when you raise it to that below 50,000, it's like you don't know who... it's not like you know exactly who's getting it and who's not. And then it's like, okay, like everyone's getting it. It's not, we're not continually giving money to this, guy who just is going to be homeless and, he's not filing for unemployment. But I do think there should be, like you said, it's not supposed to replace working. And I don't know. I think if there are jobs in the area and no one is applying for them or no one's taking them, then you lose access to your basic income.
Yes and no. I agree with both sentiments. To me, welfare is like kind of like prison. I rather let 10 guilty people go than send one innocent person to jail. I rather have 10 people abuse the system than neglect one family in desperately need of it. Like, that's kind of like my mindset for welfare. It's definitely a broken system that needs to be fixed, but I just because a job's available doesn't mean you should take it. Like, I don't know. I saw this with a lot with the '08 crash. I saw people with business degrees who went to 4 years, were making $50,000, $60,000 because they lost like everything with the housing market. They were forced to take a job for McDonald's. Maybe that UBI would allow them an extra 2 months to find a job a little bit more suitable to their qualifications. Now, I do agree with you though that if an opportunity arises, though it may not be the opportunity you're looking for, perhaps you should seize it. That's definitely carries heavy merit, and I definitely agree with it. But I can also see the other side to be devil's advocate.
So, as someone who will be paying into the system and is currently, paying taxes, it's very frustrating to work in an industry plagued by labor shortages when record number of people are on welfare. So it's, we have to.
So that's where I think a big incentive is different between welfare and universal basic income. Is you wouldn't be able to survive off universal basic income. It would force you to get another job.
Right. As long as we cap and this is what my fear is, and a lot of people's fear is with the UBI, is that once the cat's out of the bag, that's it. It's currently touted as a replacement for welfare, but once we see that UBI, it's not something you can survive off of, I feel like we're just going to make it a higher amount of money, and then it will become something you can live off of, right? It's like where do you stop?
So, two things. To live off UBI, in my mind, the only way to live off UBI is to have like 7 roommates and live in a cockroach infested house. Like it should take like 5 to 7 people all on UBI to somehow make it together and survive. Like 2,000 on rent, 500 on groceries, and then like the rest on the other bills.
So I mean, like a cheap,
that should not
a shitty apartment by me is like 500 to 750.
Is that for single person,
for a 2-bedroom, or it's just cheaper than single in most places by me.
Yeah. So like that, it makes sense that if you want to live in squalor, you could live off UBI, but UBI should not be able to live well off of. Like you could probably make it work, but probably not the best standard of living. Definitely not buying any Corvettes, that's for sure. Which brings me to the one thing I've never seen anyone talk about or discuss. How to remove a UBI once implemented. Say if it's a bust and it doesn't work, how to remove it from the system. I've not seen anyone talk about it or anyone give any examples to it. It seems like something that important we should have an exit strategy. Or is that just me being crazy?
So I guess it's not a great example, but back to Namibia, they just did it a year-by-year basis. They'd vote to renew it, and then they didn't renew it in 2009, so it just ended.
That's smart. Have it almost like a sunset law. I like that strategy. That probably worked pretty well. And I mentioned the analogy with prisoners, I'd rather let 10 guilty men go than one innocent person go to jail. I did see an interesting conundrum. How would the UBI affect people in jail, probation, felons, released, and also how would it affect overseas workers? Like no matter where you move to in the United States, unless you renounce your U.S. citizenship, you're paying taxes. So what happens if I move to Australia to be a miner for, 2 seasons? Do I still get the UBI because I'm paying taxes into the system? Or I'm sent overseas as a soldier. Do I still get the tax system? And then, the whole jail, felon, and probation I mentioned. And I would love to hear your opinion on it, Nick.
I mean, it's universal, right? Allegedly.
Well, I feel like Alaska rules. Like if you're a felon, you don't
Well, I
get
think,
it.
right? So that's the thing. It's supposed to reduce the crime rate by offering an alternative to crime. It's just like the prisons. If you punish these people too much, then it doesn't work. But I do agree. Me personally, I would say if you commit felony, then yeah, you lose your access to UBI.
For life or just while you're incarcerated?
Do you want like to,
Because we lose free you lose freedoms once you have a felony. Do you lose UBI once you have a felony even though after you served your
I would
time?
say so. Say like add 10 years to your time, right? So you serve 5 years, and 10 years after that you get your UBI back. I don't know, or 5 years or something, or do you give it right
Interesting.
away so that you don't have to resort back to crime? I mean, I could see both sides.
Just food for thought. What about age? UBI for say children up to 25, but say working class adults from 25 to say 65 get less UBI, and then people over 65 get a bigger UBI.
So I think what starting age, 16 is a good starting age because in poorer income populations, it's at around that age that people are pulled out of school to start working. And if
Well,
they
for
were,
the
yeah,
Cherokees, it benefit them at all ages.
what do you mean? Like you start at age 0?
Yeah, as soon as if the kid's alive, they get part of
See, I
the.
don't like that. I feel like you're providing a financial incentive to have kids.
Yeah, touche, touche. I would agree with that.
So I would say, I could say start at age 14. I ideally I think 16's right. I mean, how many people are sending their 14-year-old to work? I mean, it depends on the population, and this is why.
Maybe we just set it up when you get your first job is when you get enrolled into the system. When you're filling out your forms, you just fill out one
Yeah,
more.
and this is why I like your idea. I don't know if it's your idea, but it being a state system, because what these people have pointed out, they're not wrong. $1,000 in New York City is not the same as $1,000 in Ohio. So a state can tailor it to whatever specific area, whatever they feel is right for their state. So whether that not just be amount, but also age it starts and ends at. In Namibia, after 60, they stopped, giving money. And I don't exactly know if that's like, then they had like a Medicare system or something after that or what. But so they stopped there. And I'm guessing it was because at that point you can support yourself, hopefully, is the goal. I'm not sure.
I think we both agree with all the systems. UBI should be a tool in the toolbox to get you out of a situation where you need UBI.
Yes.
That's what I was getting from you talking about the African scenario with them switching to a different system after the voting ended it.
Well, they decrease poverty.
So is UBI just a Band-Aid instead of an STD? It's actually a Band-Aid?
I believe so. I mean, it seems like UBI in 2 years in Namibia has done more than the welfare in the United States has over
since the 60s, right? Is that when did welfare come in? No,
probably
it had to be
New
during the
Deal.
New Deal, right?
So almost 100 years compared to 2 years. We're seeing really good numbers out of Namibia. Very small sample size comparing one to one, but pretty promising.
Maybe maybe they just have a better mindset on working than Americans do.
That's probably true. Yeah, I don't know. I would say, and I think UBI has its place. I don't know if its place is in a developed country. I'd say it definitely seems like it works in developing countries. From everything I've read and that you've read, I haven't heard of a poor UBI example.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I have one more major topic I want to address on. I've seen many people talk about how a UBI in a developed nation will lead to more losers. Less people incentivized to work, less people to want to go out stuff and want to just stay home, play video games. I would say we already kind of have that with current job crisis and stuff like that. But my personal opinion would be this. There will always be losers. UBI may just switch who the losers are. It may be a person who is so poor on money they have no choice but to try to find work in better situation, versus now a person who would be in that scenario no longer has to, and they don't change. I think it will be always losers. If you had 10 people, 2 of them were losers, and you add a UBI, I imagine those 2 losers would not be losers, but a different 2 would take the place. I think no matter what, you're going to have people without ambition in the world who want to just come home, crack open a beer, and not better themselves and just turn on reality TV. But I will have to say, from everything I read about UBI, even though it doesn't seem to be as beneficial in first world countries, it does seem to increase the quality of life, whether it be through anxiety, stress, etc., a small amount. And to me, that pays more deviant. To raise the standard of living even half a percentage overall without freedom being sacrificed, I would say make it worth it. Once we start adding other caveats of like they get to check on what you're spending it on, start getting freedoms taken away, then I disagree with it. But I want to hear your opinion on this, Nick, of there will always be losers, and a UBI will simply switch who the losers would be.
100%. So I completely agree. It's not going to stop losers. And not my words. I think it's a great example. It was a pro-UBI argument in a debate. And basically it was UBI takes away excuses. It takes away, I can't afford gas. I can't afford the bus. I can't afford to do this, to get to work. I can't afford to, take online class, whatever it is. Everyone knows that, you get that UBI check. Everyone knows you can't afford it and you choose not to. It takes away your excuse to better yourself. It takes away your excuse for not, doing that thing, whether it's, filling up your car to go to work or, whatever it is.
Getting that certification to get you a better job.
That your excuse doesn't work because everyone knows that you can't afford it. Because on top of your job, you make at least this much extra from the government. So my one question that I didn't see answered super well, I don't know if you came across it. Why, if it was truly universal and everyone got an extra $1,000 a year, why wouldn't prices just go up to reflect that extra $1,000 a month?
I think in some industries it will, but have you ever heard the expression, if you were to equally divide all the wealth within a month, it'll go back to the way it was?
No.
It's an expression on how, I probably said the expression wrong, but expression is wealthy people aren't just there where they, by happenstance. They worked hard and a lot of people spend their money poorly. I think the idea for UBI mainly is to get more money circulating. When more money is circulating, cost usually doesn't increase. So I think that might be an offset. But I do think, I think rent would probably increase to match it. I don't think food would increase. I think food would stay pretty much the same. Education is already ridiculously expensive. I don't really see that increasing anymore. Maybe more people could afford health insurance. Maybe actually in some industries, I can see it raising. In some industries, I can see lowering. So, say health insurance. Not everyone in the United States has health insurance. And now all of a sudden, they have an extra $1,000 a month where they can spend some money on health insurance. Well, that we might see such an uptick in health insurance that the companies lower the cost because they're getting more customers. So they can pass on the savings to the customers to invite more customers over. I think it would just be a very industry-based adaptation to UBI.
I just think that prices are going to go up. I mean, kind of like, when the government was going to give a $7,000 rebate for electric vehicles, like a month ago or so. And surprisingly, the price of electric vehicles went up by $7,000. I don't know who could have predicted that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that either. I actually don't think I saw anyone talk about that. Perhaps that's where the taxation of large businesses come from, to perhaps mitigate that or discourage that, so to speak?
I mean, that almost seems like like a challenge. Like, oh, you're going to tax me to pay for that? I'm just going to raise my prices.
Good point. I take that back. Never mind. That seems exactly what would happen. And I'll be honest, Nick, they have far better lawyers than the federal government.
That is very true.
I don't know. I would, because when I was looking at South Korea and Finland, I didn't see any evidence pointing to changes in cost, but that's also because it was small scale and not large scale. So I imagine you have different parts of the country doing so. Like other parts of the country still in this non-UBI system. So it kind of makes it mitigated. So maybe we can only do UBI for poverty line or below to make sure
there's no price gouging.
Yeah. Maybe UBI is like the negative income from the 1970s of like, we set a price of, it has to be the lower middle class. Lower middle class is defined by that. We still don't have an exact number of what defines the lower middle class, which I think that formula should definitely needs to be invented. We take that. All right, this is the lowest of the middle class. This is the lowest middle class number. Everyone below this gets UBI. And based on how close you are to the UBI, this number is how much you get in UBI. That would make sense to me. Because I agree with you. The best way I see UBI in first world countries is just to get rid of welfare and just replace welfare. Even if it's just a temporary Band-Aid fix until we devise a new welfare system that's better. And also, I hate bureaucrats. And anything that makes less bureaucrats, it sounds quite beneficial to my happiness.
So, recap Mike and Nick's UBI solution. Below 50,000, you get...
Below formula. I want hard formula so that way the government can't fudge anything.
Okay. Below hard formula for what we can say is an actual lower class,
lower middle class and below
numbers targeted. So instead of, say, hypothetically 1,000, 2,000 to those people who actually need it, and financed by a combination of, alcohol, tobacco, weed,
trees,
some whatever, gasoline or something like that, kind of excise taxes, maybe some natural resource help from whatever state you're in, and state run as opposed to federal run. Is that kind of what we have come to the conclusion of?
Yeah, it seems like when you actually live in the state you need to take care of, it makes you take care of the state better than if you're in Washington, D.C. and you need to take care of Arizona.
Yeah, that makes almost too much sense.
Yeah, it's really weird? With like FDR's New Deal, he had the 12, was it 12 steps?
I think so.
Yeah, he had 12 steps. They were written out bullet points. I've seen yet to anyone do that for UBI. Like, I've just seen philosophy and like, hey, we could do this. I've not seen, this is what we do, followed by this. Nick, you've laid out a lot of steps I agree with, and we're kind of like, this is kind of like our plan. Why has no one else ever done this? Why has no one else just wrote in bullet points of like, hey, this is the system. We keep it simple. We keep it in the lines.
Because people are afraid to implement it. I mean, in full disclosure, this basically means I didn't do my research. I did a whole episode on UBI and didn't go to Andrew Yang's website. I'm assuming he probably had some kind of plan laid out there.
Ooh, touche. I completely forgot about that.
But other than that...
My bad. My bad.
But it's not like I didn't do any research. So there were some plans laid out, but...
But also shame on the other people for not coming up with a plan. Like, it's easy to talk. It's hard to come up with a plan to be able to execute it. What was your song lyric quote?
No, money for nothing, chicks are free. Well, Mike, we had to answer 2 more questions. What would you do with universal basic income?
Invest. Act like I don't actually have it, and just simply keep putting it in like something that follows the S&P 500 or bonds, and just
so the smart version of what I did with my stimulus money.
Yes.
So me and my wife were like, we didn't work for this money. You might as well like do something that's either going to pay or not pay. So we put it into crypto.
Please tell me it wasn't Dogecoin.
No.
Bitcoin
and Ethereum.
Whatever. Oh, nice. Those aren't actually the worst things to invest in.
So I was like, I wouldn't invest my actual money in it, but I'll put taxpayer money into it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I'm getting 12,000 a year, if I get 12,000 a year and I put into a system and say I'm getting 3% interest rate, that adds up quite quickly in a decade.
And I want to say we did not need that money to survive. So it's not like I was investing into crypto in order to get out of debt or anything. We were just like, we make more, enough to survive on, live comfortably. Someone's giving me, four grand in checks.
You got $4,000
over the course. So me and my wife each get 1,200
Oh
every
yeah,
time.
yeah.
We got 3 or 4 checks.
I only think I got 1,000.
You need a new accountant, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I had to do it myself, but I used that to pay for grocery bills because I was poor during COVID times.
So a perfect example of why we need targeted UBI. Because some people are spending it on cryptocurrency. Which, fun fact, will still happen even with targeted UBI.
Touche. Oh, dude, I'm just curious on how many people would go to casinos with their UBI money.
50%. I don't know.
That's a lot of fucking
lower than that, but higher than you think is my guess.
Oh, the government gave me a free $1,000. Hey guys, how about next month we all take our stimulus and go to a casino?
It's usually like 100. Actually, tickets to Vegas are pretty cheap, so anywhere between like $75 to $150 to fly down to Vegas. So,
well, I'm thinking with online betting, because now online betting is pretty much legal across the entire United States. What? I can see a lot of people betting online, gambling.
Why not?
Always bet on black. What was your second question, Nick?
My second question was geographic location of UBI. I know we talked about targeted financial, whatever that formula is. I guess probably the likely answer is the formula you have will include geographic area, but so your formula hypothetically is going to pick, it's each specific area will have a number associated somewhat with the cost of living. So if you're so much percent below what would be considered poverty for that area, you would get it.
Ooh, see, this is where it gets complicated. I don't know if I would choose specific county. You might have to do it for state, which I don't think you could do it federally, because someone living in Nebraska versus New York City is very different. So you're probably gonna have to do it state, because to do it by county is too much more bureaucracy, and that's how you get the cycle to continue and restart.
That's a very good point. Yeah, so I think that's probably the best answer is statewide. And again, it's with that extra money and not dividing it by county, that's encouragement to find, a more affordable place to live and being able to move there with that UBI. So that would make sense.
It might be an added benefit for UBI is dying towns might get to be to have a little of a resurgence. Enough people have enough money to move out of a major city because so many people are working from home to move to a smaller location. So it might actually, it's two ways. It's either going to decrease small towns or increase small towns. But I think it might actually increase small towns because you have the extra money to travel to where you need to go to. So if you're in a shitty small town, you can leave, but also vice versa. If you're in a major city and you can work from home, you can use that extra money to buy another piece of land outside the city.
Yeah, I think that, I think no matter how it's implemented, there'd be a massive change in society a couple months after UBI took effect, would be my guess.
Yeah, and it's definitely looks like it's coming soon. One way or the other, we're gonna have a hard answer on whether UBI is coming or not. Something that's been debated on for centuries, but it's a bit concerning, Nick. To be honest with you, it's a little nerve-wracking with the idea that AI could take so many jobs, the idea that civilization's changing so rapidly, the future's scary.
I mean, that's why they call it the future.
I don't think that's why they call it the future.
Well,
but good effort.
I mean, there is no fate but what we make. So I mean, you're never gonna know, or it's not going to be. It could be continue, and what I think is going to happen, technology is going to continue to increase. Jobs are going to change, but I don't think we're going to see this major loss of jobs like we think we're going to see. We may see major loss of jobs in a certain area, but I think they'll transition to something else. Not necessarily learning to code, but I mean, we thought the combine, not the big diesel mechanical, like the John Deere, metal parts, oxen combine, shit like that was going to end society because we were taking away so many jobs. I mean, this is Industrial Revolution, the same thing. This isn't the first time Luddites. This isn't the first time advances in technology people have thought the end of working. And I don't think it's going to be the last. But that's just me.
One can hope. But with that being said, Nick, what are you reading?
I am reading The Future of the Last Wild Food for Fish by Paul Greenberg. And it's about salmon, tuna, cod, and rockfish, basically. It says bass, but anyway, it's pretty good. I like books about the natural world, humans' effect on them. I don't like books that are preachy. It's kind of getting there. But it's hard to read a environmental book that's not preachy. So, what are you reading?
I'm reading a book about where I'm going to go. I'm reading Dante's Divine Comedy.
I forgot you were reading that. I was about to say Straight to Hell. And you beat me to it.
Yeah. And it's actually pretty good. I'm only a few pages in, to be honest with you. Mostly been researching universal basic income because there's a shitload of information on it.
There's a lot of philosophical information.
A lot of fluff information. So I haven't had a really good chance to sit down and actually start fully, truly reading it. But so far, so good. As I descend into hell.
So far, so good.
And Nick, you got a question for our listeners?
What would you do with universal basic income, and what is your preferred plan? Now, I don't want to know
the sex toys
at what
buying.
tax. Well, that too, but I don't. Step by step, at what tax bracket are you going to do a progressive tax? But more of who you're gonna be taxed. Who's getting the money, and please don't comment tax the rich, because you can tax all the millionaires and billionaires like 100% and still not afford to pay for universal basic income. So we do need a better plan than quote unquote tax the rich.
And where can they tell us that information?
That's also helpful. Yes, that would be Reddit and Instagram, YouTube. That's pretty much it. Haven't gotten Twitter yet. Have we?
I don't. That's your department still.
So
I don't know.
That would be a no.
That would be a no. But with that being said, thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We rarely finish a podcast without missing a point we wanted to bring up, so let us know what we forgot. And if you have a topic you want us to talk about, let us know at Backyard Philosophy on Instagram and Backyard Philosophy Podcast on Facebook.